He walked just 150 feet and vanished. No scream, no trace, just silence. 12-year-old Garrett Bardsley left the lakeshore to change his wet socks and never came back. The Uintas are a different kind of wilderness. They don't feel welcoming, not in the way most mountain ranges do. The air is thinner, the peaks jagged, and even in August, the nights bite like early winter. But they're beautiful, raw, untouched, and different. That's what drew the Bardsley family there in the summer of 2004. Garrett Bardsley was 12, a Boy Scout, quiet but funny, red-haired, and full of the kind of quiet energy that made people smile without knowing why. He lived in Elk Ridge, Utah, with his parents, siblings, and a close-knit community that revolved around church, school, and the outdoors. For the Bardsleys, hiking and fishing were more than pastimes. They were a way to stay grounded. And this particular trip, in late August, was supposed to be a final breath of mountain air before school started. Garrett came with his father, Kevin, and other boys from their scout troop. They set up camp near Q Brant Lake, a remote alpine spot tucked behind thick pines and granite fields, reachable only by foot. No roads, no cell service, just trails, tents, and water so cold it numbed your ankles in seconds. The kind of place where everything slows down until it doesn't. I've been to that lake. Years after the fact, I hiked in with a ranger. Even knowing the story, it's hard to grasp how quickly things turned. The trail from the lake to the campsite is short, maybe 150, 200 feet. You can see both ends at once if you stand just right. It's not a place you'd expect a child to disappear. But that's what happened. On the morning of August 20th, Kevin and Garrett woke early to fish. It was cold, misty, the kind of air that clings to your clothes. Garrett's shoes and socks got soaked. Annoyed but unfazed, he told his dad he was going to the tent to change. Kevin watched him go. It should have taken minutes. It never did. This part sticks with me. That one decision, letting your son walk 150 feet alone to change his socks. How many parents have done the same, in parks, at beaches, in the backyard? And yet, something about that morning, maybe the timing, maybe something else, set into motion a mystery that would tear through a family, a community, and leave more questions than answers. Kevin waited. 5 minutes. 10. Maybe 15. At first, he figured Garrett had gotten distracted. Maybe he was talking to the other boys. But something felt off. That sinking feeling, the one every parent fears but hopes never to know. Kevin started walking back to camp. Garrett wasn't there. He checked the tent. Nothing. The panic hadn't set in yet, but it was coming. Fast. Kevin Bardsley didn't panic right away. He was a scout leader, a father of 6, a man who knew the outdoors. He told himself the same things anyone would. Garrett probably stopped to chat, maybe went to the wrong tent, maybe doubled back to the lake, and they just missed each other on the path. Logical thoughts. Reassuring lies. But when Kevin asked the others, no one had seen Garrett. That changed everything. The lake, at that time of morning, was still. No boats, no noise, just water and wind through pine. Kevin retraced his steps. He walked the path over and over, calling Garrett's name, expecting to hear a laugh, a voice, anything. The distance between the tent and the lake grew longer with every pass. It was as if Garrett had walked into fog and never walked out. Within the hour, every adult in the camp was searching. They fanned out through the trees, across the lakeshore, down trails leading nowhere. At first, it was controlled, organized. But as the hours passed, and no Garrett, no footprints, no movement, the search turned frantic. I've talked to volunteers who were there that first day. They remember how strange it was that there weren't any signs, not a dropped fishing pole, not a bent branch, not a shout from the woods. Just stillness. That afternoon, they hiked back to the trailhead and contacted authorities. Within hours, Summit County Search and Rescue arrived. They brought dogs, horses, helicopters. That night, temperatures dropped to 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough to kill. Rain began to fall. A Boy Scout was missing in the mountains, alone, wet, underdressed. And they had no idea which direction he went. The official search launched on August 21st. That's when the scale of it really hit. Over 200 trained personnel showed up, rangers, deputies, SAR teams, K-9 units, even Black Hawk helicopters from the National Guard. It became one of the largest search efforts in Utah's history. But something about it felt cursed. The weather fought them. Rain, wind, sleet. Trails became slick. Scent trails vanished. Dogs lost interest where they shouldn't have. 3 days in, they found a sock. A white Nike ankle sock. Half a mile from the lake, near a talus field, jagged boulders stacked across the slope like broken teeth. It matched the type Garrett was wearing. His parents confirmed it was his. But nothing else. No shoe. No second sock. No blood. No drag marks. Just one sock. Some searchers believed Garrett might have been moving, maybe injured, disoriented, trying to signal help. But others noticed how unlikely it was he'd make it that far on his own, especially without being seen. Especially in that terrain. It wasn't a path. It wasn't even a trail. It was chaos underfoot. Still, they kept searching. Kevin and his wife, Trish, camped at the site for days. They didn't leave. They couldn't. Every rustle in the brush, every bird call, they hoped it was him. But the mountains gave nothing back. By the end of the 9th day, the official search was scaled back. The press conferences grew quieter. The volunteers thinned out. But Kevin stayed. He kept walking the lake's edge, day after day, calling for a boy who should have been home by now, picking out a first day of school outfit. Instead, there was just rain, cold stone, and silence. In most missing persons cases, especially in the backcountry, there's a pattern. You look where they were last seen, check the logical routes, trails, water sources, game paths. You expand in concentric circles. Eventually, something turns up, a footprint, a wrapper, clothing, or, tragically, remains. But in Garrett's case, the pattern broke. I sat down years later with one of the original SAR coordinators. He told me flat out, it didn't make sense. We covered everything. That kid should have been found. By day 4, the search area had grown to over 10 square miles. Crews on foot swept dense timber, alpine meadows, cliff edges. Helicopters scanned from the air. Divers checked lakes. They even used FLIR, infrared cameras capable of detecting body heat, mounted on helicopters flying low and slow over the trees. Nothing. And that sock, that lone white Nike, was the only physical trace of Garrett ever found. They brought in scent-trailing dogs from multiple agencies. At least one dog reportedly showed interest near the sock site, but then lost the trail entirely. Another gave a false alert that led nowhere. The weather didn't help. Cold air, wind, and moisture scatter scent fast. But what puzzled handlers was that there was so little for the dogs to even try to follow. Kevin Bardsley started building mental maps of the area. He marked grids, ran searches like a man possessed. Other volunteers joined him, hundreds of them. People who'd never met Garrett, driving in from all over Utah, some even from neighboring states. They combed through thorny underbrush, rock slides, crevices. They stayed in tents, weathered storms, returned night after night to help. I walked that terrain myself. The boulder field where they found the sock? It's brutal. Sharp, unstable, cold. If Garrett somehow got there barefoot, or with one sock, he would have been bleeding. They would have found blood. They didn't. There were rumors, too. Whispers among volunteers. Some said the sock felt placed, not dropped. Others wondered why it was so far from the lake. Half a mile may not sound like much, but in that environment, it's an eternity for a wet, underdressed child moving uphill through rocks. One theory held that Garrett became disoriented and moved erratically, what SAR teams call trackless behavior, often caused by hypothermia. Victims wander in illogical directions, hide under brush, or remove clothing in a confused state. It's tragic. But again, there were no other items, no trail of discarded gear, no second sock, no footprints. Then came the questions no one wanted to ask. What if Garrett didn't just get lost? Some volunteers started asking whether he could have been taken, kidnapped, maybe even lured. But the sheriff's office publicly dismissed that. They said there was no evidence of abduction, no tire tracks, because there were no roads, no witnesses, and Garrett was last seen alone for only a few minutes. But I've learned to treat no evidence differently. In wilderness cases, the absence of evidence can be deceptive. Silence doesn't always mean nothing happened. Sometimes, it means no one was looking in the right place. By early September, official efforts wound down. But Kevin didn't stop. The Bardsleys raised money, built a website, organized their own searches. For weeks, then months, they kept returning. They held prayer circles, fundraisers, and briefings with private searchers. They fought to keep Garrett's name alive. But in the wild, time works against you. Snow comes early in the Uintas. By October, most of the area was blanketed. Whatever clues might have existed were buried under frost and ice. And Garrett Bardsley was still gone. The official theory was simple. Garrett got turned around, wandered off the path, and succumbed to exposure. Tragic, but not uncommon in the backcountry. Hypothermia, after all, kills more hikers than bears or mountain lions combined. But the more I studied this case, the more that explanation began to unravel. Let's start with the distance. From the lakeshore to camp? Maybe 150 feet. That's less than the length of half a football field. In daylight, with tents in view. Garrett wasn't new to the outdoors. He'd camped in the Uintas before. He knew the trail, and he wasn't panicked or injured. He was just heading back to change his socks. So how does a boy vanish in that gap? Then there's the terrain. The immediate area isn't a maze. The trail runs along a gentle rise through sparse trees. Even if Garrett stepped off the path, he likely would have seen or heard the camp. Kevin was just minutes behind him. He didn't hear footsteps, shouts, rustling, nothing. If Garrett had fallen, gotten stuck, or doubled back, someone would have seen or heard something. But no one did. Some theorized animal predation. That maybe a cougar or bear had taken him silently. But wildlife experts were quick to dismiss that. A mountain lion ambush would leave signs, blood, drag marks, disturbed soil. And Garrett weighed nearly 100 pounds. Even the strongest predator would have left some trace. There was none. Others raised the possibility of a fall, into a crevice, or even into the lake. But divers scoured Brant Lake and nearby water sources multiple times. Visibility was clear. Nothing. So that brings us back to the sock. It was found nearly half a mile from the lake, at the edge of a boulder field, rugged, sharp, uneven. The kind of place you don't accidentally wander into. Especially barefoot. Especially as a child. The sock wasn't torn. There were no blood stains. No prints in the surrounding dirt. And there was nothing to explain how he would have ended up there in the first place. Could hypothermia explain it? Possibly. Victims sometimes remove clothing, confused by what's called paradoxical undressing. But that typically happens in later stages, not within minutes of exposure. And even then, the behavior follows a pattern, multiple items discarded, not just one sock, and usually near where the body is later found. But Garrett's body was never found. The deeper I dug, the more I realized the investigation quietly closed in on a conclusion, not because it was certain, but because there was nothing else to hold on to. The sheriff's office didn't want to spark hysteria about a possible abduction in a wilderness setting. They stuck to the safest narrative: accident, exposure, tragedy. But off the record, some searchers weren't convinced. They pointed to inconsistencies. The lack of animal signs. The total silence. The idea that someone could vanish so quickly, in such a short distance, with no trace, except one sock, half a mile away. And then there was something else. Something the public didn't hear much about. Another disappearance. It wasn't just Garrett. That's what stopped me cold, months into the investigation. I'd been reviewing maps, statements, timelines, trying to understand how one boy could vanish so completely. And then I stumbled across a name. Derek Seeley, age 18. Disappeared in the Uintas, 2002. Same general area. Same silence. No remains ever found. 2 years before Garrett. Derek was older, hiking solo, reportedly troubled. Not exactly the same profile as Garrett. But the similarities in the disappearance were hard to ignore. No distress signal. No gear recovered. No confirmed sightings. Just a point in time, and then nothing. And there were more. A woman named Catherine Knight, 62, vanished while hiking alone in the Uintas in 2003. She'd left detailed notes with her family, including where she was going. Her car was found at the trailhead. She never was. Not a shred of her gear has surfaced since. That makes 3 people in a 2-year span, all in or near the Brant Lake region. Different ages, different trails, but the same outcome. No trace, no remains, no closure. When I called a former search and rescue coordinator and asked about these cases, he hesitated, then said something I'll never forget. We've had people go missing before, but not like this. Not clean. Clean. That word stuck with me, because that's exactly what Garrett's disappearance felt like. It wasn't messy. It wasn't chaotic. It was quiet. Surgical. As if something, or someone, had removed him from the landscape without leaving a single ripple. I want to be careful here. I'm not claiming there's a serial predator in the Uintas. I've reported too many stories ruined by reckless speculation. But I also know that patterns matter. And when the same section of forest swallows 3 people in as many years, with no remains, no answers, it demands attention. There's a term used in missing persons cases, cluster disappearances. Researchers like David Paulides, a controversial figure to some, have documented national parks and wilderness areas where people vanish under similar circumstances, often within narrow geographic corridors. Some call it bad luck. Others suggest something darker. The Uintas appear on that list more than once. I spoke with private searchers who've studied the Garrett Bardsley case for years. One man, a retired firefighter, told me, "There's something off about that whole basin. The weather turns fast. GPS glitches. Dogs lose the trail for no reason. I don't know what it is, but it's not just the terrain." When I hiked through that area myself, I carried a GPS unit. And sure enough, twice during the trip, my tracker dropped signal for no clear reason. Both times in the vicinity of the boulder field where the sock was found. Coincidence? Maybe. But if Garrett had been the only one to vanish, maybe I could accept it. A single tragedy, swallowed by the wild. But he wasn't. And the silence, the cold, empty quiet of that place, no longer felt natural. It felt deliberate. Which brings us back to the core question. What happened to Garrett Bardsley? Because if it wasn't weather, and it wasn't animals, and if it wasn't a fall, then what was it? Years after Garrett vanished, I stood where he was last seen. The air was sharp, the lake perfectly still. Pine needles crunched under my boots, and mist curled off the water like smoke. The spot where Kevin Bardsley watched his son walk away looked almost unchanged, just trees, rocks, and a faint path that disappears into the brush. It's nothing, and somehow it's everything. I followed the trail Garrett would have taken to camp. It's short, too short. The tents would have been visible. The ground was mostly flat, no cliffs, no hidden drop-offs. I timed the walk, less than 90 seconds. You could close your eyes and count to 100, and that would be the window where the world shifted. As I stood at the edge of the boulder field where they found the sock, I tried to imagine every possibility. Garrett wandering barefoot across these sharp rocks? No blood, no pain, no second sock. Garrett falling, unseen, unheard, in such a short span of time. Garrett taken, by person, by nature, by something else? Nothing made sense. Not fully. What struck me most wasn't what was there, it was what wasn't. No signs, no stories, no resolution. Just the wind and stone. The kind of silence that presses into your chest and doesn't let go. I thought about Kevin. About the ache he must still carry, knowing he let his son walk a few steps alone. About the guilt, even though there's no rational blame to be had. He trusted the mountain, the trail, the moment, and it betrayed him. I've reported on dozens of disappearances, but Garrett's story stays with me because it leaves no trail to follow. Just a sock in the rocks and a hole in the lives of everyone who loved him. Every theory feels like a guess. Every explanation leaves something out. And maybe that's the most honest truth here. That sometimes the wilderness doesn't give answers. It gives silence. And that silence can be louder than any scream. As I packed up and hiked out, the shadows stretched long across the ground. I turned back one last time toward the lake. It looked peaceful, serene, but I don't trust it anymore. Because somewhere between water and camp, a boy disappeared. And no one, not the rangers, not the searchers, not even the mountains themselves, ever told us how.